Muchas gracias. Me gustaría empezar por
I
agradecer.
would like to begin by thanking the Central Bank of Chile for the invitation, Governor Marcel Gloria Peña and her excellent team that has organized the conference for having invited the IMF, the Statistics Department, to explain what is our position with regard to the main topic of the conference, how to measure the digital economy. Bueno, ahora pasaré a español porque la he preparado.
Spanglish rather than English or Spanish. So I have good and bad news. The good news is that I think many of the policy questions that Governors Marcel and Silva da Costa have raised, we have answers for those questions. The bad news is that I'm going to repeat some ideas that previous speakers have also made. But my hope is that by presenting a different perspective on these same things, I might help people to retain some ideas when back home. So this is an outline of what I tried to speak about. You will see at the end a bonus, which is the fund's digital strategy. The digital economy, previous speakers have insisted, that is permeating the whole economy. It's affecting all what we do currently in the economy. So therefore, it's raising a lot of policy questions that, as previous speakers mentioned, productivity slowdown, but also impact on employment, on job creation. Also new forms of financing that raise a lot of regulatory questions. What's going on with Fintech, with new ways of financing trade. The existence of crypto assets, cryptocurrencies, central banks now entering into the possibility of issuing digital currencies. All these are things that obviously are important from the policy point of view, and therefore, that is a digital strategy which goes well beyond statistics, but of which the Statistics Department is also part of it, and mostly related to how to measure the digital economy in statistics. So the big policy questions, some have already mentioned. Productivity growth slowdown. Now that we have inputs of production which are more sophisticated than ever, why don't we see GDP growing at a much faster pace? Can it be because we are mismeasuring some components of GDP? Nadim has made it very clear that from his point of view that's not the case, and that things are correctly measured in GDP. I anticipate that my answer is going to go in the same direction as Nadim's. So then we have the issue of free digital products. Those are increasing, obviously, households' welfare. Is it fair to say that they are not correctly reflected in GDP? And my answer again is going to be no. So I anticipate that, but I will explain why I believe that that's not the case. And it's connected with the previous question to Mariana, in which somebody was saying, okay, in GDP we are already measuring something related to free products and services. So if we were including some estimates as well, probably there's a high risk that we would be double counting some things. And the final one is a wider one, was also mentioned by Nadim, is that now with globalization and digitalization, and also the existence of the informal economy, things have become far more complicated to measure. So are we missing a significant chunk of what is going on in the economy? So starting with the first one, one thing that was already mentioned is what do we mean by the digital economy? So if the digital economy is now everywhere, all companies, all businesses have already an online platform, are using digital inputs of production. If we measure the digital economy in a broad sense, probably we would be speaking about the whole GDP being affected by the digital economy one way or another. That will be very impractical in terms of defining exactly what the digital economy is. So our focus in defining the digital sector in the fund's report on the digital economy that we issued last year is to focus on three components, which are pretty similar to what Nadim was saying before. So producer of ICT equipment and ICT services on the one hand, that's number one. Number two, internet platforms like Amazon, eBay, etc., which are being used for e-trade. And number three, platform-enabled activities which are related to the sharing economy, peer-to-peer, etc. This Airbnb and similar platforms which are matching supply and demand. So Nadim already mentioned the work that is currently ongoing on this handbook on digital trade. I mean, the IMF and the OECD are collaborating on this, and he spoke about the importance of how, what, and who. I mean, and this in terms of connection with the users, we also believe that is very important that we show things to them in the way they expect to see them. And this is the direction that this work is taking. Now, to explain if the mismeasurement of the digital economy might be an explanation to the slow productivity growth, I mean, it's important to have some kind of idea about how important the digital economy is as a percentage of GDP. So in 2008, we already made an attempt based on US data to come to some kind of number about, in percentage of GDP, how much in levels the digital economy could be. And we came to a number of 8% of GDP, which is probably the largest that I have seen in similar work. So for example, I know that the BEA, the American BEA, I mean, only came to something like 6.9% in 2017, already up from 5.9% in 97. And in Australia, similar work only reached to 5.7%. I'm aware about some work in Chile, but non-official sources, which widen the contribution of the digital economy to GDP to something like 22%. But this was taking this broad definition of digital economy, including all sorts of things that have to do with the digital economy. So it was logical that they came to a larger number, but not speaking about the same thing, let's say. So, all in all, I mean, relatively reduced in terms of levels, and as explained before by previous speakers, I mean, definitely the digital economy is growing faster than the rest of GDP or production, but still with a level of 8% of GDP as a maximum, it's difficult that this might explain the 1-2 percentage points that we are missing intuitively in GDP, that this can be explained by these contributions to GDP. Then there was this other question that Nadim also mentioned, which is, can we use GDP to measure welfare? And our answer is no. It would be an error, because GDP is defined designed for what it's supposed to respond. I mean, to the measurement of production at market prices. So it omits consumer surplus, and therefore, I mean, in terms of levels, we would be missing some important part of production, of welfare, sorry. However, our view is that in terms of changes, I mean, when GDP grows, there is also growth of welfare of households. This can be illustrated by the typical diamond-water paradox. I mean, water is indispensable for humans' life, diamonds are not. And nevertheless, measured at market prices, diamonds have a much higher value than water. So, if we were measuring things for what people need them or etc., I mean, we would be speaking about a completely different price for water and diamonds. But still, I mean, our view is that we can look at GDP as an indicator of welfare in terms of changes and not levels. So if we illustrate this with this formula. So if we see here, I mean, this is consumption and this is consumer surplus. We see that the levels are not the same, but when there is an increase in consumption, this means that households have more income and can consume more. This obviously increases also welfare, and we see that the proportion in which welfare changes is proportional to the change in consumption as well. So again, this same idea that using GDP as an indicator for welfare makes sense when we are speaking about growth rates, but not when we are speaking about levels. Now, coming back to free products and services, the answer to the question that was made before is that free products are already reflected in GDP one way or another. They are measured indirectly because they are included in the price of a smartphone, for example. I mean, now you do no longer have to buy a separate GPS or a photograph camera or many other things that now get integrated in the smartphones. Or free products or free services offered to consumers like Google search engines or Google Maps. I mean, or even we can read now newspapers online. We do not have to pay for those, but this is not for free. I mean, those businesses continue existing because they are getting their earnings from somewhere else. And in most cases it's by advertising, which is actually covered in GDP. So if we were including something else to account for these free products, we would be running a high risk of double counting. So there have been some exchanges, some discussions about the possibility to estimate or impute the value of free products into GDP. But the problem is that GDP is an accounting identity, and if one imputes production, one also needs to impute income and expenditures. So basically what we are saying is if we wanted to impute something in terms of production, we will need to attribute the income to households for them to acquire these free products. And then we will be having this same amount of imputations on output, expenditures, and income. What would be the result? The result would be that imputed expenditures don't create jobs. I mean, imputed income cannot be saved, taxed, or spent on other things. So basically, we will be rendering some of our macroeconomic statistic aggregates unuseful for policy purposes, because they wouldn't be responding to what is behind. So my answer to this is similar to the one Mariana gave this morning, is this looks more than research than official statistics. So if somebody comes with a question to people about how much you value certain things like social media or other free stuff in the internet, you can use these questions of how much are you willing to accept for giving up to whatever during this amount of time. And probably, as Mariana was saying this morning, I mean, the range of responses we will get will have high heterogeneity. I mean, it's something which will make very difficult for us to continue using official statistics if we were including these estimates in our official figures. Now, the one on which I have a slightly different view compared with Nadine's is the one on data, considered as a product of an asset. The view of the statistics department is that there is still some research work to do in order to come to a final answer to this question. The importance of data, I mean, is absolutely unquestionable. I mean, now we see operations, big acquisitions in the economy, like, for example, Facebook buying WhatsApp. And one wonders, why is Facebook paying this amount of money for WhatsApp? I mean, there is an issue of competence. Perhaps, I mean, WhatsApp was started to invade a business Facebook messaging Facebook was very interested in. But the real value of WhatsApp for Facebook was its users and the data coming from its users. So you pay a lot of money for a company basically because of the data they are holding. So there is something related to value there that we cannot ignore, in my view. But we have to go step by step and decide if data is something that we need to consider in our statistics. I mean, we need to answer a few questions. I mean, I put here whether the data are produced, which is where Nadine was already saying, no, data are not produced. But we need to start by saying, is data an asset? I think probably very few will say no to the value of data, and we will all recognize that this is an asset. But then we need to decide whether it is produced or non-produced, and if it's produced, whether it comes into production, whether it's an element that can be used to produce, and then whether it's something that we can use over several years, in which case, I mean, the treatment in our accounts would be different. And all these questions, in my view, are still not answered, and we need to come to a conclusion on this. So this is why we see data more as an open issue that we might consider in going to the next generation of statistical manuals. The value of data can be measured by different means, via costs, market transactions, or the present value of the projected income stream. I mean, speaking about the statistics here is not the end of the story. Obviously, one has to see how this is reflected in the accounting books of companies. And it's true that many of them do not have or do not recognize the value of data in their accounts. And usually we have a problem with if something is not reflected in the way we believe it should in accounting, and we try to reflect it in statistics. So, I mean, this is an issue that, again, we will need to continue looking at. And then there is the question mark that in the end, if we consider that data might be a factor of production and is determining nowadays the business models of many institutions, the issue is that data is a non-rival, can be used as a factor of production by many companies at the same time. It's actually helping politicians win some elections. but it can be usable repeatedly over time and space. I mean, the problem is the possibility of double counting, which one needs to think how to avoid. So again, I think that there are many open questions here, so I wouldn't be so radical to say the debate is over here. I think we need a bit more research on this, and the fund is definitely looking into this. Now, how to measure the output of the digital sector. Many of the things have to do with the four elements that I highlight here. How rapidly the digital sector is changing. Then issues like software or online platforms and e-commerce and ICT services. Those different components, I would like to speak about them. Supply and use tables will definitely help adjust for some of the gaps in source data, and I think previous speakers also mentioned this. So, starting with the growth of the digital sector, I mean, there is work going on in which the US, for example, censuses have seen in 5 years e-commerce doubling and platforms tripling, and this is growing even faster in some Asian countries. So, the main problem, which was also mentioned by previous speakers, is if this is changing so quickly, I mean, how we can keep our registers and our statistics up to date to capturing all these business models. And our response to this is that the procedures have to be strengthened with regard to capturing births. I mean, new entries into the business samples need to be captured by registers and in business surveys. Also, there is a big opportunity in the use of administrative data. I think Mariana also alluded to this in her presentation this morning. There is this idea of digital tax. If this is related to the use of tax data, I mean, administrations need to talk to each other and give compilers the opportunity to get access to this data and cover for data gaps. But there is also the big opportunity of engaging in a dialogue with the big data providers, digital companies in the private sector. And on this, I mean, the wealth of information that they have might be impossible to replace by any other means. I mean, surveys will definitely never get to the amount of detail available in Amazon, for example, regarding e-trade. So, given that we have a problem there with these transactions below the threshold that Nadim mentioned in his presentation, we need to see for alternative sources of information, and definitely these private data sets might be one of the sources that we can end up using. Trade associations may have more information about the composition of their own industry. And then there are other less, let's say, standard methods, like the ones used in Indonesia and Vietnam, that they were simply looking at advertisement and other employment data to estimate the size and growth of the app economy. So, again, non-orthodox or non-standard ways of getting the information. So we need to get up to date with new information sources to cope with the challenge. With regard to software, here we have an important policy question, which is, and I think it was mentioned also in one of the previous presentations, that companies are no longer, or not as they used to do in the past, buying software and incorporating it to their own machines. I mean, what they are doing in many cases is just simply, leasing the use of software in the cloud, and it changes completely the results in our statistics. This can shrink the amount that we record under investment, and this will be just the provision of a service. Obviously, the good news is that this will make companies far more dynamic, because, I mean, every time that software changes or you need something new and your software becomes obsolete, I mean, you do not need to buy, again, a new license. But the problem is one of how to measure this in our statistics without, creating some confusion from users. Then we have the online platforms and e-commerce, which in principle I agree with Nadim on this. I mean, should be covered already by business surveys. The question is how difficult it is to do this. So their revenues comes, as I mentioned before, from advertising, data sharing, commissions, fees. So they are measurable, and actually part of it is being measured already in GDP. The question is how exhaustive is our coverage at the moment. And then e-commerce, I agree. I mean, it's a big question. And so the problem here is that things which were relatively difficult before, I mean, because everybody had to pass through customs, I mean, now going to Amazon is relatively easy to buy something. And the problem is not the size of these transactions, which in many occasions, I mean, they are just below a threshold and therefore statistically not significant. But when you aggregate millions of transactions, I mean, then the volumes and the final amounts become very, very significant, or can become very significant. So the risk of statistical errors is there. So we definitely need to, come back again to my question this morning to Mariana, where we can take this information from. I mean, if we are speaking about global providers, or in many occasions, I mean, national authorities will not have the possibility or the tools to collect this information from them. So some kind of, internationally coordinated approach to deal with these global players might be necessary if we do not want to, undercovering these transactions. Here we have an example of an online platform, but I think it explains very well how this works, so I will not, insist on this. ICT services, again, as I mentioned before, the challenge is how fast they are changing and growing. And therefore, I mean, the issue is how to include these new products when measuring ICT services. So, for example, broadband internet service providers, I mean, no longer can be ignored because they might be ones accumulating a lot of what is going on in our economy. So we see opportunities in telecommunication companies as direct reporters, and they are in most of the cases the big ones already part of direct reporters for most compilers. The question is that now they can provide data that or in businesses that they were not dealing before. And the issue of e-mobile and mobile money payments used to be important already in Africa. We have seen many cases in which people without access to an account can transfer money to their relatives in other countries using telecommunication companies. Now it's extending somewhere else. At the beginning, many people said, I mean, it's not our business, this is not happening in Europe, it's not happening. Well, now we see that this is starting to happen also in Asia, for example. And sooner or later, most probably, it will be worldwide. So telecommunication companies can definitely be a strong or important information source in the future. But not only for telecommunication services, but for also financial services. And then I spoke before about cloud computing, how important it is, and what are the effects that they have in the dynamism of the economy if they are used in the proper way. Now, recommendations to compilers is basically a summary of what I have been saying before. In general, obviously, resources from statistical agencies have to be sufficient to targeting now digital businesses, which are now concentrating more and more part of what is going on in the economy. So therefore, I mean, the proportion of resources devoted to this needs to be enough. Then the issue of access to data by statistical compilers. Again, I mean, important to coordinate between different statistical agencies and public agencies in order to get access to administrative data to compilers. And then, again, repeating several times the same thing, partnerships between private and public sector is absolutely fundamental, and this is what we are currently doing in the fund and hope to coordinate in the future with other international organizations as well. In the case of prices, I mean, the challenge is that new digital products need to be included in the index compilation. But the focus has to be, as Nadim also mentioned before, on quality adjusting, a selected list of products. Here, I mean, it might be difficult. Definitely, we cannot compare a cell phone now with what used to be a mobile phone 10 years ago. Now we have the smartphone, and the quality and the elements, including a smartphone, have nothing to do with what it used to be 10 years ago. So this is an area where we need a lot of work and effort. And for those countries that cannot do such sophisticated work on quality adjusting, some of them are already taking other estimates carried out by neighboring countries. So I invite other compilers to do the same in thinking how to measure prices. And then obviously there is also some work for us, international organizations, in mainstreaming compilation approaches that can take into account also those countries with lower statistical capacity and resource constraints. In the field of national accounts, our main recommendation is to partner with price statisticians. We said before, I mean, in previous presentations as well, how important it is the composition of deflators. And if both statistical experts, price accounts, price statisticians, and national account compilers could use the same basket of products to calculate the aggregates and also the deflators, we believe that that could be an excellent opportunity to go forward in this direction. For external sector statistics, the challenge, we mentioned it before, small transactions via digital ordering and delivery of services. And then we need to target one way or another online platforms as providers of the information that we need. And we also need to see, as I mentioned before, whether telecommunication companies and other new kinds of digital channels to provide payments, I mean, how they can provide also the information that we need. And finally, monetary and financial statistics, and this has to do with what I mentioned before about things which are not so well regulated, let's say. The marketplace lending platforms or peer-to-peer lending are things which are obviously something that monetary and financial statistics need to focus. And also the big debate about digital currencies and also crypto assets probably is something that we need to keep an eye on. So my conclusions, just to finalize, are that there are many conceptual questions coming from the digital economy, but the core framework of macroeconomic statistics remains valid. I have gone one by one explaining why we believe this is the case. The level of GDP might not be a good indicator of, to measure welfare, but definitely GDP growth is something that is closely related to the growth in household welfare. But this is not an answer to the big question mark about the productivity slowdown. We would be looking for something that explains 1 to 2 percentage points of missing growth, and the most we get with our, upper ceiling of any estimates, we get at the maximum of 0.3 percentage points, which I insist is not an error, is the most that we can assess the possibility that something we're missing, which we don't believe it is the case. Still, we see the treatment of data as an asset or an input to production, something on which we need to continue working, and this should continue being discussed, and we continue working on it. So we believe that the current framework is a sound portrait of economic reality, but it has to be used for what is designed. And this, I enter into something that is in everybody's mind, which is that the next generation of manuals will be coming at some stage in the future. Both in the area of national accounts and balance of payments, we are already having our research agenda developed, and we are working on the groundwork leading us towards the next generation of statistical manuals. So we need to have all these issues we are discussing in these 2 days on our agenda, and we do, and we are doing work already here on this. But we cannot pretend that our core statistical framework will be able to respond to all important policy questions. I mean, there will be things which will go beyond the production boundary or will go beyond balance of payments. There are issues related to the ultimate beneficial owner and the ultimate destination of investments, cross-border investments, on which the balance of payments, which is designed on the basis of the principles of institutional unit, residence, etc. I mean, if we want to respond to these questions also using the same data sets, I mean, in the end, we will be having something that will not be able to respond to any of the policy questions. So we need to be careful about preserving the way our macroeconomic statistics framework is designed and use it for what it is designed. And now, if other constructs are necessary to respond to some of these policy questions, and there is the idea of statistics compiled on a nationality basis, for example, to respond to global value chains and other questions raised by the 2 governors this morning, globalization, etc. There might be the need to complement our core statistical framework with other constructions based on a different set of principles. But we shouldn't be confusing users trying to accommodate things that could put at risk for what we designed our statistics. As Nadine said before, I mean, many of these issues were already there, but the issue is that now with globalization and the rise of the digital economy, now these things are exploding. I mean, special purpose entities, intellectual property products, e-commerce, I mean, these are things that existed some years ago, but now, they have completely exploded, and we need to do something about it in terms of measurement to be sure that we are collecting them properly. The next generation of statistical manuals will definitely need to consider this and provide guidelines to compilers about how to treat this, and then think which things we can respond with our current framework and which others will need supplementary or extensions of the current framework to respond to them. And therefore, the coordination between both statistical worlds, especially in the areas of external sector statistics and national accounts, becomes fundamental. So if Pablo allows me, I would like to speak very briefly about the fund's digital strategy, very quickly, just a couple of minutes. So there is the Bali Fintech agenda, which was initiated by the fund in the G20 meeting in Bali, trying to provide global solutions to some of the questions we have been discussing today, like cross-border statistics, central bank digital currencies, legal institutional frameworks, these issues of things that in the digital economy are going beyond the current regulatory frameworks and how much we need to do in order to cover them. There are issues that have impact with multilateral surveillance. Now in our Article 4 reports, we are covering more and more these kind of things because they are impacting and affecting a lot our member countries. So as you see, there are different dimensions of this. I would like to raise your attention to the bottom line of this slide, in which there are two issues that have importance for what we have been discussing before. Is measuring intangibles and big data, and these are things that we are currently working on. Some of the others, like fintech or digital advisory services, are things which are also having an impact on statistics and that we need to cover. So, but in the case of intangible assets, we are doing some work on data as assets. I have mentioned this before. On global value chains and multinational companies, we are also dealing in that framework with intellectual property products, special purpose entities, etc. On crypto assets, we issued a clarification paper last year in which we provided guidance to compilers about how to treat crypto assets. There was nothing before. And some people feel that it is necessary to create new categories for reflecting crypto assets in macroeconomic statistics. We also do think that it is necessary to create a new category, but until that time we need to provide an answer to compilers in countries like Georgia. This is becoming an important part of the economy, and therefore they need an answer about how to treat this. So we were instructing or suggesting or providing guidance of the treatment of crypto assets as produced non-financial assets under a new category as valuables. And then cloud computing is also something on which we are doing a lot of work as well. So there are several fund-wide initiatives to promote the use of big data, not only in statistics, but in all policy areas of the fund. So there is a big data community of practice in which we are sharing between different departments projects related to big data. And it's in that context in which we are starting to initiate dialogues with the big digital companies in order to have access to their data for different fund purposes. Then we have a consortium also with the World Bank and the American Development Bank to have conversations with the private sector, with Google, Zillow, and now with Amazon. We are having these contacts. And then we also have a cloud-based big data lab in which we are supporting experimental projects using big data. One of the examples of a project with big data is that of mobile money that I mentioned here in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, that we are currently undertaking. We also have another one with scanner data in Indonesia, in which we are partnering with the Netherlands Statistical Office. And in this one, we are partnering with the UK Office for National Statistics and Vodafone to carry out this project on mobile money. And just to finalize with a bit of advertising, one of the things that we are doing anew in the statistical department is that we are converting our courses, the ones with which we provide training to compilers to increase statistical capacity in the countries. We used to have face-to-face courses. More and more we are using these online courses in order to give access to a much wider range of compilers and from their own countries. I mean, it will be available during the whole year at any point in time. And therefore, I mean, newcomers are coming to the statistical department on a constant basis. So what we are trying to do is to use more and more this online training in order to provide to our membership. And also, in some cases, we'll be using this as minimum requirements to get access to our face-to-face courses. So this is just to finalize with a positive note. Thank you very much for your attention.